Hey YouTube, Tactical Timmy here. I wanted to talk about fiat money, inflation in France, and some of the lessons learned that I've gotten from actually reading this book by Dickerson White. This book was published way back in 1914 and has some commentary on how France's money supply actually inflated away and how that actually ended up hurting France in the long run during the French Revolution. This is a really quick read. I don't know if you can make it out on video, but it's only about 60 pages. And it's a really good read because I drew a lot of value from reading over this case study. It goes over the change that was going on during that French Revolution time period. And the change was they were moving away from the gold and silver standard that was kind of the common standard in Europe back then. And they were moving away from that in order to try and pay for a lot of the government spending that had been going on. It was common back then for when you had government spending, they ended up trying to find ways to get around having to pay that and not have to raise taxes on citizens, because raising taxes is always going to be a hard thing for people to get over. And so what they did is they had recently confiscated a lot of real estate from the church back then. And when they confiscated that real estate, they started seeing the praises of real estate. And it reminded me, when I was going through the pages of this book, it reminded me how the fact that in 2008 we praised real estate a ton. And I thought it was interesting that their idea was that they were actually going to use real estate as a backing for currency. So as opposed to using silver and gold, which is what traditionally had been used as backing for currency, what they would do is they would divide up and they'd try and sell off the different real estate that the church had acquired over the years. And now that the actual, I guess it would be France at the time, they were going to sell that off. And in selling that off, they would have the backing for a fiat currency, or something that is not backed by specie, or something like gold or silver. So when they actually did that, there were a lot of people that were proponents of actually having those notes that were going to be created and having those be bonds. And if there were bonds, they'd be interest bearing. Encourage people to actually save those bonds because they would earn interest in the future, and they wouldn't be being spent day to day like these traditional American currency, like you see in front of you, is spent day to day. So when it comes to this happening, what ended up happening is they ended up doing this, and they created, but they didn't actually create it being bonds. They actually just created it as currency. And what this happened is all the problems that they were having is they were able to pay off all of that government spending. It actually gave a boost to the economy, but then all these problems started to resurface again a short time later. And it's almost like they had gotten that first hook, like a drug addiction, and you have that hook that gets placed. And after that hook, they found out that, hey, the next one was just that little bit easier. And they decided to, hey, let's go ahead and let's print some more. And let's go ahead and that'll take care of our next little bit of government spending. We'll be done after this. And it did, in fact, again, provide some help. And they found that, it paid for all that government spending. It found that, it was a boost to the economy because everyone had more money to spend at the time because the government essentially had recirculated this money into the money supply. Now, and that created a nice little boost to the economy. However, again, it flattened off, and you kind of started to create this cycle of, instead of actually paying for things, they were just inflating away the money supply. And this caused some significant problems. They talk about in this book, they talk about the boom-bust cycle, and that's something that kind of became commonplace. And when you have this boom-bust cycle, it ends up not benefiting those who actually manufacture goods and those who are really working to create goods, because maybe you create all these goods that are really valued during booms, but then all of a sudden when a bust happens, it's not going to be valued anymore. So you don't have the stability that the species previously had created. And also, it just becomes a problem when people are spending money that they don't have, and there's no honesty and value behind the money that's being spent. This created another big problem that the book actually talks about, and that problem is the fact that people were valuing speculation and even betting. And with that betting, you found that, you could make a tremendous profit betting and speculating on things, and you'd get it right sometimes and you'd get it wrong sometimes, and you'd have these like rags to riches stories where people speculate on the right things. And a lot of people like to think that, hey, speculating in gold and silver maybe could be one of those opportunities to go from rags to riches nowadays. But back then it would be different things that they'd be speculating on, and you'd hear these stories of betting and people going from rags to riches, and it created this idea that it's not value that's actually creating wealth, it's actually just getting lucky. This caused a lot of problems for them back then. You had these people that were winning would really value all these luxury goods, and they'd be spending money, and it would not encourage any of the savings. And savings is such an important thing, because savings really truly means that you are taking things and you're putting them aside for a rainy day in the future. And that's something that's really important to do. You have to make sure that you're preparing for the future. You have this really interesting mix of society that you have inflation where your bread is really expensive, and you have these people that are betting and speculating on things. And they talk about in the book the Jacobin Party, which was a party back in France. And I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to French history, so don't take this with a grain of salt. But the Jacobins' idea could have been an idea that was proposed today. And AOC has a famous dress that she wore once, where in the dress says, AOC dress says, it says tax the rich on there. And that was the Jacobins' idea, is, hey, let's tax the rich, and when we do that, we'll be able to pay for all this government spending. And you kind of see that back then it didn't end up working, because the rich had already kind of diversified away their wealth, and they actually didn't have any of this publicly visible wealth. They had either taken the specie or the gold and silver coins and actually hoarded it away where they couldn't be found, or they had invested in foreign countries. And there's lots of different ways that people that have a lot of money can hide that money. And that's the case back then in the 1700s as it is now. Because you see that us raising taxes, especially on rich people, they don't end up paying those taxes. We see that the corporate taxes could be raised, but corporations aren't the ones paying more and more taxes. And I think it's really interesting that throughout this book that we see that a lot of the same problems that they were having back then are the same problems that we face today. And I think that that's really telling for us. And I think that's why it's so important to actually study history. The final thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was the fact that they had all these problems in France, and that finally led them to implementing price controls. And you saw these price controls failing, and you saw that they would force shopkeepers to sell at a given price and force farmers to sell to those shopkeepers. And they ended up creating like spy networks that would look for these people to sell who would sell at inconsistent or outside of these price controlled prices, and they would end up killing or imprisoning these people that were not selling for this currency. And that ends up being kind of a scary situation. And you hear a lot of things going on in the French Revolution where it's their issue, or I guess what we view as an issue now, but their solution back then was simply, hey, we're gonna just kill and imprison people if they don't get on board and they're not doing what we want them to be doing. And that's kind of a sad thing, because you see that liberty and freedom was what France was fighting for back then, but you don't see them actually achieving that. You ended up seeing, my limited study of history, you see Napoleon coming along, and you don't see an actual republic or an actual democracy forming, you saw that in their attempt for freedom and their movement away from monarchy, you saw that they actually created more tyranny for their average citizens. So much so that most of these shopkeepers and farmers and people not even necessarily with a ton of money were those that were hurt in the French Revolution. And not to mention that you had years and years of fighting and lots of bloodshed along the way. So I think that this is a really, really good introductory point in terms of studying the French Revolution, in terms of studying money and fiat currency. It's something that I want to continue learning more about because I think this really is just a simple case study of something that we can learn from. I really encourage y'all to go out and pick up this book. Like I said, it's only 60 pages, and it's interesting that something written back in 1914 can be so applicable today. I found myself throughout this book actually finding little passages that could have been said in today's day and age just as easily as they were said, commenting on things going on back in the 1700s and the commentary that was written in 1914. Over 100 years ago, this commentary is still applicable today. And a lot of those issues that happened in the 1700s are the same issues we face today as a society. I hope that you found value in this video as I discussed what I learned from reading Fiat Money, Inflation in France, and I hope you pick yourself up a copy. And I would love to hear if you know anything about the French Revolution or anything about fiat money and inflation. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. If you like this video, please leave a like for me. I know it really helps growing the channel. Take care, y'all.